The operation began under the desert sun, miles from any visible landmark, at what was supposed to be a secure staging area. We were flown in at night and driven across flat, cracked land bordered by distant mountains. The air was still, the kind of silence that felt like the world had forgotten everything else existed. When we finally reached the site, a small, unmarked outpost of trailers and guard towers, something shifted. My throat tightened. No insects chirped. No birds flew. Overhead, even the winds seemed hesitant. We were told that beneath the sand lay a facility government hushed, compartmentalized, sealed. Our orders were clear. Enter, survey, take samples, and collect all data. No speculation, no questions, no delays. From our first step onto the compound, nothing made sense. The metal gate had no latch. The guard at the entrance shots fired. Warning us off, said only, "You'll regret coming here," before vanishing into an empty tower when we called his ID. We crossed over anyway. Inside the bunker's entrance, the steel door looked decades old. There was a hum, like distant machinery. But the lights were flickering, not from power surges, but because the facility seemed to be breathing. The hum resonated through every bone in my body. We brought survey drones and compasses, expecting typical subterranean layouts, straight corridors, labeled rooms, structural maps. But even before lowering our instruments, compasses spun wildly. GPS signals faded. The air felt electrically charged, enough that metal tools warmed in our hands. We sent drones in, and each return video showed shifting hallways, rearranged, doorways appearing where no rooms had existed. One drone entered and came back 15 minutes later from behind us, its feed showing us still packing gear. Another vanished. Its worm cam re-emerged 24 hours later, pointing upward, between rusted pipes, but no one was controlling it from above. It seemed like the facility's layout had turned against us, challenging our sense of direction, forcing us to believe nothing stayed in place long enough to be mapped at first. We thought it was structural collapse or shifting sands, not supernatural, just decaying. But the longer we stayed, the worse it got. Hallways looped endlessly. We counted doorways, markings, every tile. Yet we'd return to identical intersections after walking for hours. It got personal. The more I tried to stay oriented, the more the facility seemed aware, slightly shifting when I paused, subtly moving when I retraced steps. I once drew chalk arrows to show the way back. 3 hours later, I found them drawn over with crude X's. Other markings were scrubbed clean. There was something in the concrete listening and erasing. I refused to believe it until I nearly ran out of oxygen trying to negotiate the same hallway 3 times while the others panicked at the drone returning upside down. What we found in air ducts and electrical rooms turned everything horrifyingly real. Vents stained with hair-like tendrils, walls weeping greenish liquid, and small ventilation shafts ending in vertical grids that looked like slit mouths. Behind some were dark voids that pulsed. Our instruments picked up temperature drops to sub-zero, then sudden heat waves. No pattern, no logic, pure design. Tests confirmed environmental control failure, but no ventilation system was present. It was as if the facility itself regulated, timed, and adjusted according to our fear. We tried to mark routes with ribbon tape, but one morning, the tape led us to nothing, just empty metal holes and erased prints. Power cables we'd laid earlier were cut. Our equipment reports all went missing within the system log. If it weren't for my own backup drive, I would have thought I was hallucinating. No audio, no maps, no timestamps, nothing. Even our times seemed to stretch inconsistently. One entry showing us inside for 30 minutes felt like an eternity. Someone said time itself bent here. Not just in theory, physically bent. It was then I realized what the project meant by secure and study. The facility wasn't ancient. It wasn't left by previous civilization. It had been built by some project designed to hold something. Maybe a weapon, maybe a creature, but it wasn't dead. And whatever it was, it had learned how to respond, to adapt, to test. I returned to the surface with only half the team, and not because of rescue. 3 had vanished, with no trace but their helmets, still warm. Their breathing monitors flatlined all at once. One's feed looped. Inside the facility, moving in place. We found his body, or what was left behind, a maintenance panel, his jaw open in a silent scream. Another vanished mid-call on the radio. The sound was layered first, static, then a child's whisper giggling in loops. Our commander pulled us out abruptly, gasping orders to evacuate. Looking back from the rear of the transport truck, I saw the facility's door close behind me, and the ground swallowed over its threshold, as if the desert reclaimed it instantly, as if we had never stood there. Now, months later, I'm left with questions. What these people were studying, whom they expected, what they released. The whispers still echo in my headset late at night, low vibrations repeating my name. The compasses I brought home still spin underneath the desert floor map on my wall. I can't reverse engineer it. I can't say I fully understand it. I only know that nothing about that place was normal, or ancient, or abandoned. It was deliberate, engineered, alive in some way. But maybe that's the worst part. They built something to understand, maybe them, only to discover it could understand us. And now it watches beyond its sealed door, waiting for the next team to arrive. We were briefed to expect isolation and silence, but no one warned us about the noise. It started the moment we descended deeper into the underground corridors of the Nevada facility, faint at first. A low, droning hum like a generator heard through a thick wall. But as we moved, it grew stranger. It wasn't mechanical. It pulsated like a living heartbeat, rhythmic and unnatural, echoing off the metal walls. Every time we paused, the sound seemed to grow closer, almost as if responding to our stillness. We thought it might be ventilation or pressure systems settling, but when we tried to trace the source, we found nothing. No machinery, no air ducts, just smooth, cold hallways stretching endlessly in all directions. I remember how Davis, one of the newer team members, began murmuring to himself, saying the sound was talking to him. At first, we laughed it off. Stress does strange things underground. But by the end of that second day, half the team admitted they were hearing voices. Not words exactly, but impressions. Like emotions wrapped in static: fear, curiosity, hunger. The deeper we went, the louder it became, but never enough to pinpoint its origin. Sometimes, the noise shifted suddenly, turning into distant screams, muffled by layers of concrete. Other times, it sounded like breathing, long, drawn-out inhalations from behind the walls. When we stopped moving, so did the sounds, as if whatever it was new. It didn't help that our comms became increasingly unstable the further in we traveled. Radios crackled with bursts of static that sometimes aligned with our movement. The strangest moment was when Chun's headset started replaying conversations we never had. Entire segments of dialogue between us, but distorted, like someone mimicked our voices and stitched them together out of order. I heard my own voice laughing a laugh I never maidened, asking questions I never spoke. The more we tried to ignore it, the more insistent the audio glitches became, like the place was desperate to be acknowledged, as if we were being studied not just through cameras or sensors, but by something that could listen and repeat what it heard in a twisted form. I started waking from brief naps with a sharp ringing in my ears, followed by a burst of garbled voices, saying things I couldn't understand, yet still felt I was supposed to. The sound would vanish the moment I turned on my recorder, returning only when I was completely still or alone. No animal or human should be capable of creating such a sound, but it persisted in cycles. We once sealed ourselves in the comms room, trying to isolate the frequency. After hours of filtering layers of distortion, we caught a repeated tone embedded in the static, a pattern of 5 pulses, pause, then 6 pulses. Morse code maybe? Or a warning? Eventually, the noise became too much. Davis broke first. He screamed at nothing, covering his ears and clawing at his suit. He said something was whispering inside his skull, telling him to dig, to let it out. We had to restrain him. But what terrified us most was the discovery that came right after. Behind one of the sealed doors, labeled in old faded letters, Biocontainment, Sector 7, was a room filled with rows of speakers and audio consoles, all ancient but somehow still functional. The speakers hummed with that same throbbing pulse. The walls were covered in waveform print spectrograms of non-human frequencies that resembled a cross between whale songs and encrypted code. Someone had been recording this sound for decades. Someone knew it wasn't background noise. We played one of the older tapes found on reel-to-reel recorders. It began with ambient humming and the crackle of aging tape. Then, somewhere in the middle, a voice broke through, not ours, not even human. Deep, layered, and wrong. It didn't speak a language, but we all felt the same thing when it spoke. Dread, a suffocating pressure, like gravity increasing. We shut the tape off immediately, but the sound didn't stop. It kept playing, vibrating through the room. When we tried to leave, the hallway outside had changed. It was shorter and darker. Every time the noise pulsed, lights flickered, batteries drained. Our watches fell out of sync. Even simple tools like a flashlight began emitting a low tone, matching the same 5 and 6 pulse pattern. We had to face the growing possibility that this wasn't just noise, but communication. The kind we weren't equipped to understand. It didn't come from speakers, wires, or broken machinery. It came from the structure itself. The walls, the ceilings, the floor. It was inside the facility, and the facility was inside something else. Our final night inside, the humming became unbearable. Some began vomiting. Blood appeared under our skin, as if the frequency itself was vibrating our capillaries to rupture. And then came silence, complete suffocating silence. For a long moment, nothing made a sound. Not our footsteps. Not our breathing. It was like sound itself had been removed from the space. And in that silence, we all heard the same whisper. Soft but unavoidable, directly in our minds. You're awake now. We left that night without permission, breaching protocol, abandoning half our gear. When we surfaced, comms returned to normal. The sky seemed to blue, the wind to calm. But every one of us heard that hum in our ears for weeks after. At night, I still hear the pulses. Sometimes in the hum of my refrigerator, sometimes in the plumbing. It follows me like a shadow. not because it wants to scare me, but because now it knows I can hear it. We were told the lower levels were sealed off due to outdated systems and hazardous materials. But when we descended, it became clear that wasn't the full story. The elevator ride to sublevel 9 was jerky and slow, the lights flickering in time. With every mechanical groan, when the doors opened, we found ourselves staring into a corridor untouched by time, layered with dust so thick our boots left deep impressions. But that wasn't the part that disturbed us. It was the temperature. It was warm, unnaturally so, as if something down there had been running, functioning, breathing. There was no power connected to those halls, no documented activity in decades. And yet, the air was heavy with electricity and the faint scent of iron, like old blood. The hallway stretched far beyond the original blueprints. Our maps showed a T-junction 30 meters in, but the hallway continued far past that, bending ever so slightly, as if spiraling inward. The walls were no longer made of standard steel or concrete. They were something else, smooth, black, slightly reflective, like obsidian but warm to the touch. Every so often, small openings appeared in the walls, almost like vents or pores. When we passed them, some of us swore they heard breathing from within, slow, ragged inhalations that stopped when we turned our heads. None of our instruments worked down there. Compasses spun in place. Thermal readers returned nonsensical values. Cameras refused to focus, producing images smeared with static and strange, symmetrical distortions that looked like faces. Then we came upon the first room, only with the number 114 carved directly into the black surface with clean, perfect lines. The door had no handle. When we touched it, it opened silently, revealing a chamber unlike anything in the facility above. The walls pulsed faintly, as if reacting to our presence. In the center stood what looked like a surgical chair, wrapped in ancient leather and bound with metallic restraints. Hanging above it was an array of tools suspended in midair by thin, quivering strands that reached to the ceiling and vanished into the shadows. The chair was stained freshly, and on the floor below it was a single dog tag. It belonged to someone reported missing over 15 years ago. His name was never found in the facility's personnel files, but the tag was real. When we tried to remove it, the entire room groaned. The walls themselves groaned, and we left it there, backing away slowly. Farther in, we discovered corridors that looped in ways that defied physics. We could walk in a straight line and end up back where we started, despite never turning. We dropped glow sticks to mark our path, only to find them again minutes later in front of us, undisturbed. One of the team, Lieutenant Marks, ventured alone down a side hallway for only a minute. When we found him, his nose was bleeding and he was incoherent, muttering about rooms that listen and something under the floor with hands. His boots were gone, so were the soles of his feet, just skin, peeled like fruit, but no signs of trauma, as if whatever did it had been precise. It wasn't long before we noticed that walls weren't just pulsing with light, they were moving, reshaping ever so slightly. An indentation would form where none existed before. A door would vanish behind us and reappear somewhere else. It became clear this level wasn't just a structure, it was alive, and not in a metaphorical sense. There was intention. Sometimes the corridor would split just as we reached it, steering us left instead of right. Rooms would open or seal depending on our proximity. We stopped making decisions. We simply reacted. We were no longer exploring. We were being led. At one point, we entered a chamber filled with mirrors. Not glass mirrors, but polished surfaces. In the walls that reflected not just our bodies, but versions of ourselves. They moved when we didn't. They looked at each other when we weren't watching. Sergeant Leone smashed one of the mirrors in panic, and for a brief second, we all saw what was behind it: a dark, wet cavity filled with writhing veins and something shifting in the depths. We ran. Eventually, we reached the final room. Or at least, it felt like the end. The corridor narrowed until only one of us could pass at a time. Inside, there was no light source, yet we could see everything. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, all glowed with a soft red hue, pulsing like a heartbeat. And in the center stood a cocoon, translucent and swaying gently as if in water. Something inside it moved, slow, purposeful, almost human. We backed away in silence, but just as we turned to leave, the cocoon pulsed once, hard, and we heard it directly in our heads. A voice, not with words, but with memories. Flashes of images filled our minds, surgical procedures, screams muffled behind thick glass, children tested, enhanced, broken. A sprawling network of these same black holes beneath multiple sites across the world. A system designed not for storage, but for containment. And now, it was waking up. Not just this one. All of them. Whatever it was down here, we weren't meant to find it. We weren't meant to survive it. But it had let us see, let us understand, and in return, we would carry the memory. Spread it. That was the message. When we finally resurfaced, no one asked where we'd been. No debrief, no questions. Our reports were scrubbed, the footage corrupted, but we knew what we saw. And the thing that terrifies me most is that it let us go, not out of mercy, but because it wanted us to tell someone, to plant the seed. Because what sleeps down there won't stay asleep much longer. And when it wakes, it won't be alone. The first time we heard the scratching, we thought it was just mice. After all, the cabin was old, nearly a century by the looks of it, and out here in the mountains, wildlife was part of the charm. But that night, the sounds didn't come from under the floorboards or inside the walls like you'd expect. They came from above, gentle, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across the roof. We joked about it, trying to shake off the unease. But as the hours passed, the laughter faded. None of us mentioned it the next morning, pretending everything was normal as we made breakfast, but we all knew we hadn't slept. The second night, it got worse. The scratching returned, more frantic this time, as though something was pacing. Back and forth just over our heads. Then came the tapping. Light at first, but precise. Almost like a code, then heavier. As if something was testing the strength of the roof. We went outside with flashlights, expecting to find raccoons, or maybe a branch brushing in the wind, but the night was dead calm. The trees surrounding the cabin stood like statues. No wind, no movement, and no animals. On the third night, the sounds changed entirely. We no longer heard the pacing or tapping. Instead, there was a dragging sound, something being pulled across the roof, slowly, as if whatever was up there was carrying weight. We stayed silent inside, afraid to even breathe too loud. The sound moved from one side of the roof to the other, stopping directly above the bedroom where my cousin was sleeping. He came out just after midnight, pale, shaking, saying he'd heard whispering from the ceiling. Not voices, exactly, more like something trying to mimic them. Almost human, but not quite right. Words stretched too long, syllables in the wrong places, like it was learning. The next day, we searched the roof in daylight. No scratches, no dents, no debris. But something strange happened when we looked at the photos we took from the roof's edge. In one image, behind one of us, a dark shape appeared tall, hunched, almost insect-like, with limbs too long to be human. It wasn't in the other photos, and no one remembered seeing anything there at the time. We deleted it, or tried to. The file corrupted every time we attempted to remove it, so we left it, ignored it, pretended we didn't see anything. By the fifth night, we started hearing footsteps inside the cabin. They came from the attic, even though the entrance was sealed with old boards and rusted nails. Heavy, slow steps, then silence, then quick scrambling, like something darting across on all fours. We nailed the attic shut again, added more boards, but the sounds didn't stop. They just got closer, louder. One night, around 3 a.m., we heard breathing from the attic door, slow, rhythmic. Something was standing just on the other side, listening, waiting. We found the old journal in the cabin's storage room, tucked between rotting furniture and a broken fishing rod, bound in torn leather and filled with cramped, desperate handwriting. It belonged to a man named Elias Turnley, dated nearly 80 years ago. His entries began normally: fishing logs, weather notes, daily activities. Then, gradually, they became unhinged. He wrote about the thing in the roof, the same tapping, the same dragging. He described how it wouldn't come down if you stayed awake, how it only moved when the house was silent and the lights were off. He claimed it wasn't bound by walls or roofs, that it came from a hollow between places, whatever that meant. The last entry simply read, "It watches, it learns. It will come through tonight." That night, we stayed awake. All of us, huddled in the main room with the lights on and every door locked. At 2:37 a.m., the power went out. Every bulb flickered and died in unison. Our phones stopped working. Not dead, just blank screens. No signal, no battery indicator. We lit candles, but the shadows they cast moved too much, stretched too far. At 3 a.m., something began pulling at the attic door. Not banging, not scratching. Just slow, steady pressure, testing each board. One by one, the nails began to creak. We held our breath, waiting for the inevitable. Then, silence. In the morning, the attic door was untouched. Not a single board was out of place. But when we checked the roof again, there were marks, this time deep gouges across the shingles, like claws, in a perfect circle, as if it had made its nest. We left that day, pretending we had other plans. We packed quickly, not speaking, never mentioning what had happened. But none of us truly left that cabin behind. In the weeks after, we all started experiencing the same thing. Faint tapping at night, no matter where we were. On roofs, on ceilings, in apartments. One of us started sleepwalking. Another moved into a motel and hasn't come out since. Whatever was in that attic, it followed us. It watched us. It chose us. And no matter where we go, no matter how far we run, we all know the same truth now. Once it finds a way in, it never really leaves. It just waits until you're alone, until you're quiet, until you're asleep, and then it starts scratching again. The final day at the site was supposed to be routine. Our classified operation had reached its final stage, and the team was tasked with deactivating a chamber we had unearthed beneath the desert floor. It was a circular stone structure, buried deep beneath layers of compacted sand and rock, and unlike anything we'd seen in all our excavation and surveillance. No one could agree on whether it was natural or man-made, though the markings on the inner walls, interlocking spirals and jagged symbols suggested something far older than human civilization. The mood was tense as we descended into the darkness. For the last scan, something about the air in that chamber was heavier that day, thick with a dampness that shouldn't have existed in the Nevada heat. As we set up the final sequence of data capture equipment, a sharp vibration rippled through the ground. Not an earthquake, more like something waking up. Dust fell from the ceiling. Our lights flickered. The equipment began malfunctioning. Monitors glitched. Audio picked up strange static laced with high-pitched clicks, like something was speaking just beyond our range of understanding. One of the linguists with us, Dr. Kenner, began staring at the wall, whispering the sounds back in repetition, as if entranced. We tried to snap him out of it, but his eyes had rolled back, and his mouth kept moving in a low chant. It took 3 of us to drag him out of the chamber. That was when the lights cut completely, not just in the chamber, but across the entire compound. Generators failed. Radio comms went dead. We were 60 feet underground, in absolute darkness. The only light coming from the dim green glow of a cracked emergency strip by the exit tunnel. And then we heard movement, not footsteps, not voices, movement. Slithering, scraping, the sound of wet flesh against stone, and breathing, slow, deliberate breathing that echoed from every direction. We weren't alone in the chamber anymore. Someone screamed, a sharp, animalistic wail from the back of the chamber. We turned to see one of the engineers, Harrison, being dragged backward into the dark, his nails scraping along the floor, his mouth open in a silent cry. He disappeared before we could reach him. No struggle sounds, no body, just silence. We bolted for the tunnel, tripping over wires and boxes in the dark. The breathing followed us, but we never saw what it belonged to. Only shadows that moved, wrong bending in shapes no body should take, twitching with impossible angles. Something was mimicking us. We heard our own voices calling from different directions, shouting our names, pleading for help, but we were all together. None of us were speaking. We finally reached the surface after what felt like hours, only to find the site above in ruin. Vehicles overturned, watchtowers collapsed, the entire operation tent shredded, like it had been through a hurricane. There was no wind, no storm, just the dry, endless stillness of the desert and the overwhelming sense that we'd opened something we weren't supposed to. I radioed command with the emergency satellite unit we had stored for blackout scenarios. No response, but someone was listening. The screen on the unit glitched, and a message appeared, not typed by me. You shouldn't have gone down there. In the following days, we were detained at a temporary off-grid facility, briefed separately, monitored constantly. They told us we suffered a shared psychological breakdown triggered by subterranean gas exposure, that Dr. Kenner had died of a seizure, that Harrison had simply run off in a delusional state and was never found. They wiped most of the files from our laptops, confiscated our phones, and dismissed our reports as hallucinations. But I know what I saw. I know what followed us. I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time since returning. In dreams, I see the symbols on the wall moving, pulsing like veins. I hear the clicks, the language whispering from inside walls, through vents, from places that should be silent. 2 of the surviving team members have already gone missing. One was found in his bathtub, with his skin peeled off in a perfect spiral. The other disappeared without a trace, but his home was torn apart from the inside. Furniture stacked against doors, as if he'd been trying to keep something out, or something in. There's something ancient beneath that desert. Not a weapon, not a ruin. A living thing, or a prison for one. And we cracked the lock. I tried reporting it again through anonymous channels, encrypted files, but every time I upload a photo or audio recording, it disappears from the server. Even emails auto-delete before they send. Something's covering it up, erasing the truth. Or worse, something's aware every time I try to expose it. Lately, I've started hearing the breathing again. In my apartment, in the car. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel like I'm still in that chamber. Still in the dark. Still being watched. I think whatever was in there didn't stay behind. I think a part of it left with us. Or inside us. And maybe that was the point all along. Maybe the chamber wasn't a tomb, but a womb. And now, whatever was waiting there for centuries untouched, unspoken, undisturbed, has been reborn. And it's learning, watching, following us in the places we think we're safe. Waiting for us to fall asleep. Waiting to finish what we unknowingly started.